After I gave this presentation to the Charlottesville group, we decided that we wanted to do a follow-up presentation that was actually workshopping some of these ideas, bringing a couple of nonprofits together to talk about what they were doing and really think through these strategies. So I'm offering that workshopping, interactive workshop, to just a few nonprofits next Tuesday morning. If you're potentially after this interested in finding out more about that and maybe signing up, it's free. You can go to the CNE website and it's right there, and you can sign up, and you're welcome to ask me more questions about it or talk to me about that. A few notes about online etiquette for the presentation. If you don't mind closing your email, turning off your phone, muting your mic unless you're talking, obviously. If you have a comment, I have my comment box up, and I'm going to be monitoring it the whole way through. Please just let me know that you have something you want to say, and a question or a general comment, and I will go ahead and pause and answer it just like we were in a room together. Also, there's absolutely no pressure, but I do love seeing people. So if you want to turn on your video, I'm very happy to see your face, and you can even raise your hand or something like that. I'll just answer questions as they come in. One thing I would like to do, just so that we know who's in the space without taking a huge amount of time to go through everybody awkwardly and introduce ourselves, if people could introduce themselves through the chat function, that would be fabulous. Then we have some idea of who's here. So maybe put in your name and pronouns, your organization and role. And if you have had a successful COVID innovation or something like that, I would love to hear what that is, as part of us starting to share information about how you do programming in this area. So why doesn't everybody just sort of go in? I know a couple of people I think are on the phone, so we'll just miss you. But if you're not on the phone, if you wouldn't just mind putting in go ahead and chat in your name and pronouns, organization and role, and if you have a COVID success or an innovation. I'm not getting any chats. Emma for Kids Program Manager. Great to have you, Emma. Brandy, People Incorporated. Oh yeah, needs assessment with a COVID update. I'm very curious what you're doing. For Kids Program Manager. Nice to have you, Sarah. Sarah, Emma. Jessica for Kids. Ooh, For Kids is just all over the place. We're gonna have to have a talk. I wonder what you guys are doing. Sarah Johnson, Chief Services Officer. So this is going to be a For Kids intensive discussion. So I will ask you guys to share information about what you're doing, and really encourage at least the Children's Center, who is the first, not For Kids. Oh, and People Incorporated to share what you're doing, so that the three organizations can really learn from each other. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is talk about basic needs all the way around. You guys are probably all familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Most nonprofits serve folks in these first two levels of the need triangle: physiological needs, making sure people have food and housing, and also safety needs, making sure that they are safe in their homes and cared for. We also know that we sometimes serve people in the belongingness and love needs, and the esteem and accomplishment needs, trying to help people get job placements and things like that. But now that we're in COVID, just about everybody, including us, are really focusing a lot on these safety and physiological needs. And so one thing that's really important as we think about how we want to deliver our services is to make sure that our services are taking into account thinking about either changes in people's safety and physiological needs, or actually addressing people's physiological and safety needs depending on our mission. The other thing that's kind of important is this organizational hierarchy of needs. So I created this based obviously on Maslow's hierarchy of needs for nonprofits. And you can see that the essential needs of an organization are these organizational vitality needs, including making sure you have an active board and good staff and budget. And this is where a lot of resources and support have been brought together during COVID to help nonprofits kind of figure out how to get through the funding and staffing issues that have come with quarantining and reductions in donations and volunteers and things like that. What I've seen a lot less of in the world is information about how to redesign your programming so that you can get on solid footing again, figuring out how to have access to clients, how to make sure that your programming is good, and even how to access materials and resources for going forward. We don't have any evidence-based practices to help us guide us in what solid programming looks like in these times. And so we're all making some extrapolations about what we need to do. The other thing we don't know how to do is be able to measure our productivity and impact. How many people are we reaching and how are we changing lives when everything is in so much upheaval? Our traditional methods of being able to survey people are different. The number of people we can reach might be far less. And at the same time, we're really under a lot of pressure to be able to be nimble and creative and shift to the organization where it needs to go. So this is a lot for us to be able to handle. I'm hoping that everyone on this call by this time has some sense of what their organizational vitality looks like. It's probably still teetering and not feeling really strong, but some sense of how your board is functioning, how you're able to reach and support your staff, what kind of budget you're going to have for going forward, and that you have a little bit of space now for thinking about, are we doing our programming in the best possible way, and how do we measure our impact? And that's what we're going to talk about today. The first thing that I've been talking to all the nonprofits that I'm working with is really focusing down onto the very core of their programming and what it is that they're trying to deliver. Less is more right now. You can always expand what you're doing, but when you're making such big changes, it's a really good idea to focus in on just what you know you have to do and what the most salient things to your mission are. So at your core, what does your organization do? What community level need are you all working to eliminate? Some organizations are working to reduce obesity. Some organizations are working to ensure healthy food is reaching people. Some organizations are trying to make sure people have access to educational materials. Some organizations are trying to make sure that people's mental health needs are met. And so what is the very, very, very core of what you're doing? If you were to strip down all the extras that you've been able to build over the time, then obviously the next question is, can that be done virtually or with enough precautions so that your clients and staff are safe? Then what you want to do is also look at what essential needs of your clients are you able to help meet that are within your mission. So if you're an arts program, it's not going to be reasonable for you to go out and start helping to feed people, but it is important to know whether or not you're trying to provide arts to people who are also hungry. Because if people are really hungry, and we think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, they're not going to have a whole lot of space for arts. And so that may change the way you try to reach people, or what kinds of messages, or the ways in which you're trying to provide your service. Again, being small and circumscribed is a really good place to start. You don't want to bite off too much. You need to sort of figure out where this goes. We're still almost 3 months into this, evolving every day and starting to try to figure out how we're going to go forward. And so it doesn't make sense to do a huge amount of work right now, really focus in on what we can do. However, no matter what you're doing, it's very important to be clear and articulate about what you are doing. The people you're serving need that, your staff need that. and your funders need that. One organization that I'm working with here in Charlottesville, City of Promise, their executive director told each of her program managers to write a one-page description of what it was that they were going to focus on over COVID, or she really did it until summer and now she's doing it for summer till fall. And she said, if what you're trying to do takes more than one page, you're doing too much. And I thought that was really wise. Let's write down what we're doing, let's make it nice and clear, and let's make it something really accessible. I want to talk a little bit about some examples of pivots and what organizations that I've observed have been doing. And then I really would like you guys to talk about what kind of pivots you've done. And so I invite you to, while I'm talking, think about what it is you want to share with folks so that we can actually have a little bit of discussion and build that collective knowledge again. So some organizations like the CNE are able to essentially keep their programming the same, but they're just sort of doing it with video and shifting the focus of what it is that they're doing. So this is very much like a presentation that I would do in Charlottesville or that I would have traveled up to Warrenton to give. And it just, though, is now being given online. That there are obviously differences to that, differences in the way in which we're able to share information and communicate and some of the activity in the room. But overall, this is a pretty easy format to shift. Some organizations, like the City Schoolyard Garden, however, here in Charlottesville, what they do is they have gardens in each of the elementary schools and in the middle school and the high school. And those gardens are learning environments for the students. And the students go out into the garden and they have activities there. Teachers can teach classes there. They provide green space for kids. The City Schoolyard Garden also works really hard to source produce so that kids can have healthy snacks during the week and have access and taste new vegetables. And they've been working to have local and fresh vegetables on the lunch lines. With COVID, all of that programming is gone. They're still maintaining the gardens and they still gave away a whole bunch of seedlings. But the main thrust of what they're trying to do and getting healthy food to kids and having kids be able to access this healthy food is obliterated with the closing of school. And so what the City Schoolyard Garden has done is they've really leveraged their relationships with the Charlottesville Food Justice Network and the city schools, and they're working on bringing snacks and meals to kids all over the community 5 days a week. So instead of working only in the garden, they're now packing peanut butter and jelly and apples in safe ways using PPE and delivering those meals all around the country, all around the city. Other organizations like the Charlottesville United Way, they essentially stopped all of their typical programming and they focused on a partnership with our local community foundation and the City of Charlottesville to pool, and UVA, to pool some funding and give out emergency loans, emergency funding to families who are losing funding due to job losses. So for the last 3 months, they have helped person phones and then internet portals for people who need money and have been getting money into the hands of people all over their catchment area. They're actually just now going back to their typical programming. Another example from your area, the Factor Community Child Care Center is providing childcare for kids of first responders and essential personnel. And so since we're not able to provide childcare for kids in general, they're saying, well, let's make sure that we can use our spaces to make sure that our essential personnel can get to work. Another organization in your area that has really taken the virtual ball and run with it in a really innovative kinds of way is Kid Pan Alley. They actually said in an email that their programming online is working way better than they even expected it would work, but it's taken a lot of effort to try to figure out how to do it really well. What they're doing is they're offering songwriting programs for kids. So they offer 2 one-hour sessions for children, so they have these activities to do. And they're also able to offer the songwriting sessions to other kinds of organizations now because it doesn't require any age limit. So they're actually expanding that program. They're also hosting concerts for kids in kindergarten, first and second grade. And they're just now, in case you don't know, launching a weekly concert series that showcases 3 Rappahannock musicians each week on Sundays at 7. And the idea is to both give the songwriters and the musicians who are struggling and looking for outlets and opportunity to perform, and to be able to provide that cultural break and outlet to people in the community. So they've done, I think these organizations have all done a really beautiful job of taking what it is that they do and really shifting it to be able to meet the needs of the community and the most basic needs of the community in the COVID time. I'd really like to hear from the 3 organizations who are participating today. What kinds of changes have you guys already made? I'll pause for a minute and let you guys speak up.
Sure. Well, this is Paul Reisler from Kid Pan Alley. We were on stage giving a concert when the governor closed the schools, and the principal told us when we got off stage, and I thought, well, we better just go home and figure out how we're going to do this because I think this is something that's going to affect us for, not just a few weeks, but for a long time.
Very long.
And all the programs are working well, although the biggest challenge with the songwriting with the kids is that we've gone from a more wholesale model where we're going into a school and they're, writing songs with 200 kids during the week to enlisting the kids one at a time, which is definitely a much bigger challenge. So that was our first problem there, was how do we deal with that, because it's just so much work to get kids one at a time. And so now what we're doing is we're partnering with some organizations that have a built-in audience of kids, but we're also doing it with senior citizens. We just did one with our local senior citizens organization, because you can really do it with, you can write songs with people of all ages. The same thing was our concert series. Actually, we started about 7 weeks ago, and that's been going really well. One of the challenges with it was so much of what you see are musicians getting up there and they'll, turn on their cell phone and they'll play and they'll goof around. And a lot of the concerts were not, very professionally done. And so we decided we wanted to do them in a totally professional way. So we invested in equipment and in learning so that we could do them so it looked, not like a TV show, but a lot closer than what most people are doing. So that people would come back week after week to watch rather than go, oh, that was nice, they gave a gig to the local musician. And so with a lot of learning curve and a lot of effort, it looks really good for us. And but one of the things we realized, we started out with it being just Rappahannock County musicians, because I talked to a couple of my musician friends and they were all so depressed because they knew they weren't going to have work for the next 6, 8 months, year, 2 years, who knew? And so that was kind of the impetus behind it, is that we had the skill to be able to do something for those musicians. The downside of just doing it with Rappahannock County is it's a very small county and you run out of musicians really quickly. So we've now expanded it into the northern Piedmont region. And this week we have some musicians from up in Haymarket. Last week we had some from over in Middleburg. And the week after, we're expanding it down to Richmond also. So we're kind of thinking of it as Central Virginia, and adding the Charlottesville musicians we've worked with over the years in there. But we've been having wonderful crowds for them. We even did one big concert for Give Local Piedmont where we had Tom Paxton and Kathy Mattea, Daryl Scott, Robbie Schaefer. We had 10 artists on this concert that we did the night before Give Local Piedmont. to raise awareness for Give Local Piedmont, and then just to have a great time with all these world-class musicians. But I do think it required, at least for us, we were doing the same kinds of things, but thinking about how do you do it online? How do you serve the community more instead of just, oh, let's do our programs online? It was really, what's the community that needs it now? How can we be of service there? The downside is we've been doing it all for free. The upside is that people were very generous during Give Local Piedmont because we were out there doing stuff instead of hiding our head.
I'm super impressed. It seems to me that you guys have really taken what is a high level Maslow's need, this need for just self-expression and self-actualization and beauty and fun, and figured out new ways of reaching new groups of people and actually expanding your reach while narrowing your programming, which I think is just genius. One of the other things that you guys have done, you just mentioned briefly, is partnering with other organizations to reach populations of kids. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I think that's really critical, right? If you're trying to reach kids, you can't, it's very hard just, or adults, it's really hard just to sort of put some random word out there. You can't go to the grocery store and advertise. You can't, stand on the street. You can't go to the schools and stuff like that. Who have you partnered with, and what kinds of groups of kids have you been able to find?
So we're just really starting on that. We thought, at first that what we did, our first attempt was a failure. Our first attempt was going to all the schools that we had been to before and saying, okay, we'll work with your kids here. And so we must have sent out hundreds of emails to the schools we've been with before, to the principals and the music teachers. And what we found out was, that their hair is on fire, and they don't know what they're doing, and they're struggling to do something, and they don't have time to even think about anything. And so that turned out to be somewhat of a, not a complete failure, but it didn't really yield it. And so then we started looking, well, who else is trying to do things online but like what they're doing is showing videos from the past. And my thinking was, well, if you show a video of something you did 2 years ago, people don't really want to watch that because they have a million things they could watch on YouTube. What do people want? They want something where there is interaction, where there is risk. So for example, with our concert series, we have a live audience in the Zoom room, and then we also simulcast it to Facebook and now to YouTube also. And so for our big concert, we had like 8,000 people on YouTube.
No way.
25 people in the Zoom room. And so the Zoom room people could talk to the musicians. Well, we had people like Kathy Mattea and Tom Paxton for that. That's not what we usually have.
But still,
with the interactive thing that made people interested. And for the musicians, you can get up there and play a recording, and that's not very interesting for the audience, because part of live performance is like we go to the circus to, we watch a high wire act because there's an element of risk involved. Performance to be interesting, it's the performer has to be out on the edge, risking that they may screw up instead of performing from their safe place. So we've been looking at organizations that are trying to do things online, but they don't have the content. How can we help them with, more interesting content? So we're talking, a theater down in Central Virginia that wants to do things with their local musicians, and how can we help them and do like a concert series for them? They also want to do things for their school, their school kids, and they would get the kids and we would provide the content. Or like working with senior citizen organizations that already have the people that need something to do, but they can't all come together. How can they come together and do something interesting as a group?
Yeah, you guys really are a beacon. Very, very creative. I love it.
Well, we have an amazing staff. It's not me. It's
just you. I also want to speak just for a minute about buying the equipment that you need to buy. One of the things I did when COVID first hit is I actually went out and bought a really high quality camera and a high quality mic and lighting. So I am lit from all around. I have my whole little setup. Because I figured, like you did, if I was going to be giving these kinds of presentations, that I wanted to look as professional as possible and have it really shine. And so, you know, for me, it was only really like a $600 investment, which is some money, but it's not like a crazy investment, but it boosts the quality of the presentation tremendously. And so some of those sort of small or moderate investments are really good in being able to help make sure that you're providing something that feels really good. It feels really polished. So I love that. What about other folks? Does anyone have any questions for Paul, and or can you share what you've been doing?
This is Brandy from People Inc.
Thank you.
We have 30 different programs at our agency in 16 different locations. So we've been doing a little bit of everything. Some of them were far easier to move to a remote setting than others.
Mm-hmm.
I guess some of the big changes that we've had is that we are a community action agency and strive to help people in poverty move towards self-sufficiency. And we have found recently that rather than looking at big picture long-term programs, we have moved backwards somewhat into addressing the immediate short-term needs.
Yes.
So we are now offering emergency assistance. We have supplemented our food distribution programs that used to be a small part of what we did,
Mm-hmm.
and now has become a growing high demand part of what we do.
Because the needs of people are shifting, right?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. So we're not able to help them with their 5-year plan. We've got to help them with their 5-week plan.
Yes.
And then, of course, we are very case management intensive with the work that we do, which you can only do so much of that online without being face-to-face.
Mm-hmm.
So we have taken a lot of steps to get technology to our clients, many of whom still don't have internet access. They live in areas even more rural and disconnected than Rappahannock County. So we've done a lot of distribution, much like the public schools have, of laptops and tablets and things like that to help people in our workforce programs be able to continue their education programs online, to be able to communicate with case managers remotely. We also have a early Head Start program.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not in the classroom with them anymore, but we are having their family service workers meet with the parents and check in on them and do whatever we can to follow up. Just as much, regular communication with our clients as we can manage.
Well, and it is interesting. I know City of Promise that I'm working with is having the same experience, that really one of our sort of basic physiological needs now is for internet connection. Without internet connection, nobody can access anything. It's like housing right now. And so being able to help ensure that people have not just a little tiny phone that they're paying per minute for, but like a tablet or a laptop or something like that is critically important. I know here locally, the school systems might take back, they distributed tablets and Wi-Fi spots to kids, but they might take those back over the summer. We're still trying to figure out what's going to happen, in which case City of Promise is right there thinking, okay, well, we're then going to have to distribute hotspots and laptops or tablets to kids and families so that they're able to stay in communication, and we can continue to offer summer learning opportunities and things like that. So you've really gone from, you know, all these like 5-year plans and offering high quality childcare to individually supporting people also, right? One by one, finding them and figuring out what their basic needs are and making sure that they have access to whatever it is that they can find access to. And my guess is that's tremendously more labor intensive than providing group services. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, in some respects, there's also a limited amount of stuff that we can do with them. And we're still trying to transition like workshops that we would do with our business education program. We need to figure out a way to transition those online and some of those things. So that's still to come. And we have, in some cases, we are looking, we've been awarded grant funding to help pay for some of our clients to have internet access, at least for the short term, while we need to do this communication with them in their homes.
Yeah, it's really dizzying, the shift from what we used to do that was so big to figuring out how to meet these basic needs and being able to partner in new kinds of ways. I've been finding it really exhausting, but also really exhilarating because it starts to just create all sorts of new opportunities for creativity and thinking. But it's very stressful because you know how hard it is to reach people and to be able to get that work done.
It's actually been very beneficial for us from a management perspective, because as I said, we cover 16 different locations. We have 5 major offices. So now learning that it really is just as easy to meet online in a web meeting. I foresee being a significant boost to our travel budget in the future.
Yeah, right. There is that. We're actually being forced to do this. It does create a whole lot more flexibility. I mean, Jen said she was in Kitty Hawk, right? We're able to do, I mean, I guess it's a mixed blessing if it reduces your own sense of having barriers and limits boundaries on what your workday is like. But it really is a huge benefit not to have to travel back and forth and to be able to sort of meet at the drop of a hat and have a little bit more flexibility because everybody's gotten comfortable with this. My guess, Paul, is that you guys will still offer online concerts if people are interested in having them or interested in, I mean, I imagine for the musicians, it's wonderful to be able to perform to people way outside the area, where they before might have had a wonderful time and it probably was more personally satisfying to perform in a venue. Now they have reach that they never thought that they were going to have or wouldn't have been able to access before.
Yeah, and very true. And I don't think many of them miss carrying around sound equipment and playing in spaces.
That's true.
In 3 sets until 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yep.
Making less than they're making from the tip jar when they do things with us. So.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful. Before we move on, for kids, do you have anything that you want to share or questions that you want to ask?
This is Sarah Johnson, and I think our experience is slightly different in that For Kids provides services to homeless families in the Hampton Roads area. We also run a housing crisis hotline, and so this is a time where we've really had to, take precautions and, switch a lot of our interactions via phone, but really lean in and be at the front line here. There's a lot of funding that's coming, available in relation to housing and homelessness out of COVID, and we really have to take advantage of that, what's happening right now, and try to prevent, a real big surge in need that we anticipate happening once, some of the funding and moratoriums end. So we've really been continuing our service delivery. The only real big change is that we don't do, home visits. We're really doing, phone calls and dropping off supplies and food to clients. But, we've really seen where we're actually increasing our staff, increasing the number of people that we're serving. We're doing about double, at least double the shelter clients that we typically do support. So we're sort of making it work and really looking at, in some ways, we've actually been able to move forward some future initiatives because of the, funding that we're now able to move around and leverage. So it's definitely been an interesting and busy time, as we try to, deal with the crisis at hand, but also look at what we're going to need, 6 months, a year and a half from now, when everybody else has perhaps, is moving on and our folks in poverty are continuing to struggle.
How are you guys reaching the homeless families? Do they have phones? Are you providing phones? What's the strategy for contacting them?
Yeah, so many of the families do have phones, and sometimes their minute phones are not as reliable. Depends on the time of the month when they're on. But our hotline is able to reach over 50,000 folks via phone every year. So people do find ways to reach out. We're actually doing some additional marketing of our hotline to make sure that people do know that we're here. We actually had billboards go up in the last 2 weeks. And so we also have, outreach and folks on the street and really do a lot of connecting with providers to let people know, how to get in touch or to have the providers facilitate connections if needed. So there's lots of folks. At our highest, we had a couple of months ago, we had 500 calls in a day.
Wow.
From our area for folks that were seeking housing assistance. So they're definitely here and they're reaching out. And like I said, we're trying to move as fast as we can to leverage any of this funding that is available to help stabilize folks.
Sounds like you guys are doing just amazing, intense work. Are your staff feeling comfortable going out into the street? Are you able to have the protection that they need to feel okay about that?
I mean, it's definitely something that daily we're processing and working with folks on. We've got, everybody has masks, we have gloves available when needed, and are really being strategic about the times that we really do need to go out and utilizing, phone and as much as possible. And we also have about 50% of our staff in the office at any given time, and so they're sort of trading off on working remotely. So I think that helps give them a little bit of a breather. There's four of our program managers are on the line as well, so they're welcome to share. But I know that this, especially early on, helping staff manage anxiety.
Yes.
Was a big piece of what we were doing on a daily basis, and that definitely continues.
Yeah, managing anxiety. I imagine managing childcare. I imagine, just sort of managing the stress of the environment, because it's not like any of us aren't living in COVID, right? In the past, the service providers were usually living sort of with more stability than the people we're serving. And obviously we do still have a great deal more stability, but our sense of stability has really gone down, our sense of safety collectively and stability. Do any of the staff, do any of the program managers have any comments about how you guys have supported staff and helped staff feel comfortable or be able to manage some of the obligations that they have at home, or changed expectations for staff in ways that have been really helpful?
I think one of the things that we've tried to do with staff, this is Lisa Ellsworth, by the way, is just to make sure that they are reassured that their anxieties and their concerns are not just acknowledged but validated, and we try to help them process through it. As we are essential workers, childcare has been less of an issue for us because most childcare providers are providing for essential workers.
Mhm.
I think it's a day by day. I know that most of us have increased our check-ins with our staff, instead of, our general coaching or supervision that we would have maybe bi-weekly. We're doing weekly check-ins, weekly team check-ins. So we're really trying
Mhm.
to help our staff realize that they are not alone in this. And because we are on the front line, we are out in the
Yeah.
street, that this is what we signed up for, though, in the social work field. This is what we do.
Yeah.
So it's a difficult balance, but I believe are doing it pretty well for now.
That sounds really wonderful. Thank you guys for all for sharing. It's really wonderful to hear all the innovation and creativity and support that's going on out there. I invite you throughout also to share other stories that you might have. I want to spend just a little bit of time talking about productivity and outputs and how to think about impact during this time. The most important thing I think that you can measure during COVID right now is reach. And that is because the need is so vast, and the difficulty with which we have to reach people that we used to be able to reach really simply. A really good marker of sort of how hard we're working and how much we're doing is basically just found in reach. Previously, reach sort of outputs have not been considered to be as important as impact. But impact is really tricky at this point because we're all just trying to help people stay afloat, right? Whether it's the musicians or the homeless people, everybody is just sort of trying to stay afloat. And so if we're reaching them, then we have really done about 80% of what it is that we could possibly do. I know reach sometimes at this point feels kind of sad because we might have been able to reach hundreds of people and now maybe we're reaching, tens of people. Or obviously if you're 4 kids, you guys maybe have been reaching hundreds of people and now you're reaching thousands of people. But there's still people who you're not reaching who are much more difficult to access or find that you might have been able to sort of beat the pavement for and find before, or might have been walking into different kinds of spaces that aren't even open now. Once you reach people, the next level of basic impact that you can measure is really whether or not you're increasing clients' access. So every time that People Incorporated gives somebody a phone, or give somebody internet access, or give somebody a tablet, you guys are creating access in a really substantial way. Again, very much like as if you were giving them housing. You're giving them access to a basic essential service that helps them be able to be connected to the rest of the world and get all sorts of things to them. Similarly, here at City of Promise, I do all their data collection, so I'm mostly their data person. So they're the people that I know the most at the moment. They have been really working to try to help kids access the online curriculum that is being provided through the school system. So, if you aren't totally overwhelmed and you feel really comfortable online and you're able to kind of go in and navigate it and pick out what kinds of things it is that your kids are going to do from school, then you can do that. But a lot of the families that City of Promise works with do not feel really comfortable or confident doing that kind of thing and need some support in being able to help their children access the learning opportunities that are at school. The other thing that is a basic impact that you can reach is people's satisfaction with the services, whether they find them helpful, whether they were needed, and whether they are happy with the quality of the services that are being put out there. Again, access and satisfaction and reach and productivity are not usually at the top tier of data collection during regular times, but during these times, this is the crux of what it is that we're trying to do. Make sure that people feel connected and make sure that they're able to connect to the resources that are out there. Typically, I define immediate impact as the knowledge, skills, abilities, and motivation that people get from getting your services. So do they have knowledge that they didn't have before that now they can use to go out and improve their lives? Do they have skills or abilities that they didn't have before that they can now go out and improve their lives? And or are they motivated to be able to go out and do things in their lives and grow? These are the things, these knowledge, skills, abilities, and motivation are the things that people internalize from your programming that they then take out into the world to achieve those long-term impacts that we're all hoping for. Right now, however, we really don't know what the long-term impacts we're hoping for are. Even in the school system, you know, we might have been looking for higher SOL scores or grades or something like that, and all of that has shifted. We don't know what it looks like to be really successful. We don't know how to measure the long-term impact of what it is that we're doing. And so if you're really able then to focus in on what you are giving people in the moment, that's where you're going to find the most bang for your buck. The other thing that's going to be super important, I predict, is really the story of COVID and how people have responded to COVID and what they're doing. Because we're in this sort of entirely parallel universe to what we had been in before, our collective knowledge of how people navigate and survive and are resilient and struggle is broken. And it is important to be able to collect these stories. There's a bunch of ways of collecting stories, which we usually don't collect, right? Because, I mean, we might collect a couple, maybe some testimonials, but they're labor intensive to collect. Then once we get them, how do we pull out the data? You know, we have to be able to transcribe them in order to be able to understand them. And those things still exist, but being able to invest in even half a dozen stories, asking people what's going on with them, or even just having your staff invest the time in writing some stories down that people have, that they've noticed that people have experienced, I think are really going to be golden as we go forward. And as you're able to say, here's what we've noticed, people who were successful, here's 3 stories of people who were successful, who used our resources and were able to go on. And here's 3 stories of people who were not able to make changes in their lives that helped them live happier and healthier. And here's what we think was going on there. Our funders and our stakeholders are going to need to hear those stories and understand what the texture and color and pattern of people's lives are in ways that they've never understood before. And I don't know about you guys, but, you know, if I go online and I start reading about what COVID is like, there is no shortage of op-eds and opinion pieces and interviews with middle class, frontline essential workers, people struggling with managing white collar work and children and all that. You can read about that all day long. And I enjoy reading about it because it helps me feel like I understand what other people are going through and how this is affecting people. But we do not have those stories about people who are really struggling, who were struggling before COVID, who have lost their jobs and are living, you know, day to day trying to figure out what to do. And so collecting these stories is really critical. And honestly, Paul, I think even for your musicians, you know, maybe that's the population you collect stories for. How are they living? What are they, you know, what are the struggles that they're having? How does not being able to play music impact not just their bottom line, but also the way in which they are able to live a life that feels satisfying and engaged? I can tell you that United Way here has been counting the amount of money they've been giving out to people and how many families and how many individuals they've been able to give that money to. So they've now dispersed with their partners $3.1 million to 12,000 people in the area. Child care can be measured by the number of children cared for, and maybe even by then the number of people who are able to go do that essential work as a result of child care. I really would love that child care to be high quality and kids to be learning their ABCs. But might even be a luxury at this point, measuring that. Hopefully they're still getting high quality childcare, but measuring that might be a luxury. But knowing that their parents and their caretakers are able to go out into the world and serve other people is a really, really important benchmark. And you know, you guys in the arts and entertainment industry, you can talk about the number of people reached, the number of repeat customers as being a measure of engagement and appreciation, the number of new customers as being a measure of engagement and appreciation, and the satisfaction and quality of life that your performers get, in addition to even the additional reach that they get of their performances. I'm going to pause for just one moment and ask folks if they have questions or examples about how they're measuring their reach or initial impact before I go on and talk a little bit about how to do some of this data collection. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about data collection. Some of you guys probably have data collection systems that are in place, and maybe you're able to use them just like you were before. My guess is that 4Kids has some ability, some sort of database that everybody can access that they've been collecting data in, and maybe you can continue to collect data in that. My guess is People Inc. has also been able to use their database. However, it might be that the database that you're collecting data in right now isn't flexible enough, or you guys aren't able to make the changes that you need to really collect what's important right now. Or if you didn't have a database and people were collecting things kind of haphazardly at their desk, you might want to try to create some sort of a flexible data collection system right now. The flexibility part is the key here, because like our programming is changing every week, our data collection might change every week. What we decided was really important to capture in month 1 might not be what's really important to capture in month 6. Once we become more stabilized and we understand what it is that we're doing even better, we might decide we can actually expand, have the resources to expand what we're collecting, and we might need to change it then. And so really we're kind of lucky to have Google Sheets and Google Forms as a really easy, simple, remote and collective way of being able to capture data. And anybody who isn't familiar with these, I'm happy to help you think through that through email or phone call or something like that. But in Google Sheets, all your staff can just count how many people they touch, what activity did they do, how many people were touched, and it allows you to be flexible. So if one day you're touching people and collecting them by doing activity A, you can mark that it was activity A, and the next week you can go in and say, we're no longer doing activity A, now we're doing activity B, and here's how many people we reached doing that. And then in the end, when you're describing to your stakeholders what your impact is, you can say, well, over time, we provided activities A, B, and C, and overall we touched this many people. Maybe you're very lucky and able to talk about the number of unduplicated people you touched, but that might not be possible. You might not have the capacity. You might not have the capacity because everything is shifting. And so you might say some of these are going to be duplicated and some of them are not duplicated, but here we go, here they are. Zoom has a poll feature. You can have people check in and do polls and stuff so that you can count them. But if you're going to invest in any kind of data collection, meaning investing your staff time and thinking, this is where I would invest it, and making sure that you're able to count what you did and how many people you touched. Google Docs is also an amazing way for staff to be able to record what they do. You can create forms or templates in Google Docs where you can ask staff, you know, just what did you do today? How did you spend your time? Who did you touch? What lessons did you learn? What did you encounter today that felt impossible to overcome, that you don't know what to do with? What did you encounter today where you had a win? Tell me a story about somebody that you worked with this week who had a success and was resilient. Tell me a story about someone this week who fell further behind, who really struggled. What were the things that made them struggle? What were the things that made them succeed? Being able to keep this kind of diary or blog, even if you're not able to go interview people using some sort of StoryCorps method, will be able to help you reconstruct your story later. And if you can even get staff to spend 15 minutes filling in a little form in Google Docs so that they can pop out their answers, you have the richest data set. And you maybe spend a day and look for themes in it. Maybe you hire an intern or a consultant to come in and look for themes in it. But if you don't have the data, you're not going to be able to go back and be confident that those stories really existed. And capturing them in the moment is super critical, because that's when they feel really salient and when you have the most power to be able to tell that story. So we can think a little bit about what would be the 3 questions that you would have staff answer at the end of the week about what they did. What kinds of activities did you provide this week? You know, I did this kind of outreach. I contacted people individually. I worked with partners to create this kind of innovation or connection. What kinds of successes did you have? I realized that that client A really valued this one thing that I did, and they came back and thanked me for it. I realized that client B was really struggling because they didn't have X, Y, and Z, and I was able to partner with somebody to be able to make that happen. Or I'm feeling really stuck and hopeless about how I'm going to help so-and-so get through this crisis. And just collecting those and being able to review them will create for you a sense of coherence at the end of the month, or at the end of the quarter, or at the end of the semester, or at the end of the summer, where you're able to kind of look back and say, here's what it is we did, and help you be able to tell your story as an organizational leader about what's happening. And it doesn't take a whole lot of time. It takes more time in reading it than it does in collecting it, and really totally worth it. Strategy 4 is what I hope all of you are doing, and I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on it because all of you guys mentioned leveraging new funding, but is talking to your funders. When I first gave this talk, you know, just a couple of weeks after COVID had hit, it was really important. People, I think, were feeling very anxious about talking to funders, being able to say, you know, we used to be reaching 500 people and now we're reaching 15. Or, you know, you funded us to be able to do X, Y, and Z, and we're doing A, B, and C now. But I think what we've been noticing, and what I've also been hearing from the CNE, is that funders are very invested in making sure that everybody gets through this. The people that do have resources are interested in being able to share them. There may be fewer people who have resources who can share them, but people really do want to help each other get through this period. And so if you're able to articulate what it is you were doing, like we talked about at the beginning, here's exactly how we focused our resources, and create a good connection between that and your core mission and people's basic needs. And then you're able to say, and this is how we're reaching people, and it's not very many, but this is how it's happening. And then you're able to say, and this is the story of a couple of people who are examples of success, and here are a couple of people who are examples of people who are still struggling. You are going to be far ahead of a lot of your peers in the field. I'm going to stop again for a moment and see whether or not people have comments or questions about flexible data collection or talking to funders, or if people have success stories or struggles that they want to share to help build our collective knowledge again.
This is Brandy at People Inc. I did want to share, we do have a very extensive database that we use to collect our information for clients. But one thing that we did to be more adaptable and agile is that as we started an 800 number to take requests for clients in need of rental assistance, which we knew was going to generate, you know, hundreds of calls, and it did beyond our wildest imagination. We also created a Google spreadsheet that could be used by all of the staff taking those calls, so that they could see and access the same document in real time, to know who was calling, had that person already called before, and know exactly where that was before that person was entered into the database, which is a far more comprehensive, complex process.
So you merged the two then?
No,
Or
they
merge
didn't merge.
using them. You didn't actually
But yes, we
electronically merge them, but you
used
used
them
them side by side.
together.
Yeah.
Yes, because we had people answering the phones, obviously not in one central location. They're all
Right.
answering them from home.
Yep.
So this would allow them to be more coordinated in their
Mhm.
efforts,
Mhm.
and also allowed the program managers to go in and at any point in time find out how many people had called and from where they were calling, so
Mhm.
that we know where the demand was coming from. So it was a
Oh,
very
oh,
quick and easy way.
it is quick and easy. And oh my gosh, I mean, I've been doing data now for like 25 years, and we were struggling back in the day to have something like Google Sheets. And I don't like Google Sheets for doing analysis or anything, but being able to do filters and sorts and have everybody enter into one thing all at the same time. Then when I want to sit through and manipulate it, I just download it to my desktop and start manipulating in Excel, which has a lot more functionality. But it is really critical. The other thing that's really nice about Google Sheets is when you create a form, you can actually embed that in your website. So you can very easily create data collection methods from your website. So if people want to enroll in something or ask you a question, or you want to be able to have people answer a few questions or something like that, you can of course always use something like SurveyMonkey, which now seems to cost more than it used to, but you can just create your own form and link it into your right into your website, which I think is really helpful too. Any other comments or questions about data collection or funders?
We were actually really fortunate to be able to create a link directly into our database, so that clients are able to enter their information directly into our database.
Yeah.
It ended up unfortunately creating a lot of duplicate records.
Sure.
As existing clients requested this new service, but for the most part, it saved a lot of time.
Yeah.
As they were inputting a lot of tedious information.
Well, I think one of the things it probably also does, though, even though you might have had to do a little bit of cleanup on the other end, is help clients feel more of a sense of agency, and like they could access services, right? Anytime we're able to give people the opportunity to feel like they're doing something for themselves is a real improvement over them having to feel like they're more passive recipients of our services. And so I feel like the cost benefit is often, I'd rather do a little bit more work cleaning up things on my end and let people be able to actively ask me for things than the other way around, where I try to control it and people don't get to be able to participate and show activity. I'll also let you guys know, I have two jobs. I do this, but I'm also a clinical psychologist. And there is a phenomenon out there called post-traumatic thriving, which we really don't talk about. Obviously, we talk about post-traumatic stress. But there was a researcher in New Orleans who was doing research around Hurricane Katrina. And their pre-Hurricane Katrina research was about natural mentorships with women who were in the local community college in the center of New Orleans. And when Katrina hit, the community college was completely underwater, and all of the women who were taking classes at the community college spread all over the country. And so she talked to her federal funders, and she shifted her funding into being able to study what happened to these women. And what she found, she wrote up in a book called Paradise Built in Hell, and it was that the women who did something for themselves, who took some sort of sense of agency, despite all of the trauma around them. If they were the ones that were able to, get their families to the bus or drive their families out of the community, if they were the ones that were able to have a flashlight to help the community members go up through the building and collect their things, if they were the one that hit the hole in the ceiling in order to help, in the roof in order to help the helicopters find people, that they tended more often than not to show what they called post-traumatic thriving, which was that when they got to their new place, they were able to rebuild their lives in ways that were more positive and helpful for them. They were able to leave the deadbeat boyfriends. They were able to escape really limited opportunity and say, you know what, I'm going to make a fresh start for myself. They felt this sense of agency in being able to impact their lives. And if you think about what post-traumatic stress is really when you witness something horrible and you feel completely helpless, right? And so people who feel helpless are more often and more likely to take on that identity of being a victim and not being able to affect change, and are then going to be looking for fear and danger all over the place. People who are able to help feel that they are being active and having agency over their lives, even in the face of horrible trauma, are able to say, you know what, I was a victim of this, but I'm not going to be victimized by it. And they're able to move forward in their life much more often. And so I really like to think about that right now and being able to help folks by arming them with the resources that they need and then giving them challenges that they can meet. Even if it's something as simple as being able to ask for the services that they want in real time by typing it into a website. Because we know that even just having a flashlight and being able to help people go up a stairwell helps people feel like they're taking the situation into their own hands and into control. So hopefully that's a little bit inspiring and helpful for you guys. The last strategy that I have for you guys is really to make sure that you've entered in all your pre-COVID data. If you guys are not caught up on pre-COVID data, I would seriously suggest you guys take a whole day off and just make sure that you enter in all your pre-COVID data. One, your staff will forget if you wait even 1 second longer. And two, everybody that you work with is going to want to make sure that you are on track before COVID struck. So even though things feel really, really still hectic and we're working really hard to increase our reach and really hard to ramp up our services, please stop, please take a breath, please make sure everybody enters in their pre-COVID data and you feel like you have a nice bow on that, and then go on and go ahead forward. You will thank yourself 1,000 times over later on. The last thing I want to do before we end today is really talk about a bonus strategy, which is your day-to-day planning. By now, I think we're all very clear that things are never going to go back to normal. Ideally, we will get back to being able to see people in person, and we will be able to move around more safely in the context of COVID. But we are all just living in the now. None of us are able to plan more than that 5-week plan. We can assume things are going to take longer. We're going to assume that there are going to be decision points, but we're all kind of like, well, what are we doing now? How do we use the resources we have in front of us? So it's kind of nice to be able to more gently sit in that upheaval and uncertainty and say, you know what? I'm a problem solver. I love problems. That's why I got into this work. I'm creative, and I'm just going to sit here and I am going to embrace the fact that things are a little chaotic. You can go forward with stress and anxiety and tension, or you can go forward saying, you know what, we can figure this out. It's going to be a lot of hard work, but we can do it. And of course, and I think Brandy mentioned this earlier, talking about being able to save on travel budget. Not everything we get from this is going to be bad. There are obviously a lot of amazing discoveries and innovations that are going to come out of this. But you can rein in that inner visionary. I'm sure all the leaders on this call, part of what's gotten you where you are is being able to think 1, 5, and 10 years in advance and start to plan that trajectory and do that strategic planning. Right now, all that creativity needs to go into scenario, all that energy needs to go into scenario planning and creativity. How can we do more with less? How can we do less in general and reach people in really amazing ways? And then, of course, we're all also now really embracing the fact that we're going to have to create some deadlines for ourselves in what kinds of decisions we're going to make. We just got emails here in Charlottesville yesterday from the president of UVA saying, you know what, there'll be some combination of courses, in-person and online courses in the call. We don't know what that's going to be, and we're in the process of creating a deadline for deciding when our drop dead time is for deciding exactly what that's going to look like. And all of us are kind of working on that assumption. We can continue pedaling really fast and trying to figure out what we're doing. At some point, we're going to have to say, this is how we're going to move forward. And we're going to move forward in that way, expanding services in a natural way like we had pre-COVID, but in this environment. Or we're going to assume that things are going to change radically and we're going to continue to pedal. But you have to be able to make those decisions. We're not saying we're going to make that decision in, October. We're talking about making each of those decisions like in, July or August or something like that. So again, the more you can face this challenge with less tension, but lots of energy, the more you can embrace the fact that there's going to be a lot of really wonderful things that come out of this, despite all the horrible awfulness that's happening. The more you can say, I'm not going to try to think about a year in the future. I'm going to try to do some scenario planning and be creative right now. The happier you'll be as a leader, and I'm guessing the happier your staff will be, and the more effective your programming will be, because you'll really start to embrace this ability to work and find, I think, a lot of pleasure in being able to do this creative reshuffling that we're doing now. So that is the end of the formal presentation I have. I'm certainly happy to take questions or facilitate any more discussion. Like I said, I am a very small program evaluation firm here in Charlottesville. And we work with nonprofits and governments and foundations to help them develop excellent programming, to get their data working for them, and also to build evaluation strategies for them. I'm more than happy to field questions or emails from any of you guys after this presentation. I'm not going to charge anything. I'm happy to share information and lessons learned. I would love to have any of you at the workshop next Tuesday morning to think about how we're doing things. So thank you very much for participating today and sharing your stories. And let me ask if there's any questions or concerns people have. Oh, and CNE will be sending you an evaluation in your email. Please make sure that you send back feedback so that we can continue, CNE and myself, to provide you really applicable and useful services. I'll stop.
Well, thanks, Maryfrances. That was great.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks for sharing and being here.
Thank you, Maryfrances. That was a fantastic workshop. I've put in the link for Tuesday's webinar in the chat group, and I will also add it to the follow-up email. It's called Programming and Data Strategies, an interactive workshop. It's on Tuesday from 9:30 to 11 a.m. and you would go on the CNE website, thecne.org, and register there.
Jen, I'm just going to hang out here until people hang up, just in case
Sure.
there are questions that people want to ask, and then we can stop.
Sounds great.
Bye, everybody.
I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.
Okay.